Hello, Math 45 students. This is your instructor, Cindy Enrique, and we are going to continue with section 8.2. We talked about the ellipse and the circle in 8.1, and now in 8.2, we'll be talking about the hyperbola. A hyperbola is the set of all points x, y in a plane such that the difference of the distances between x and y and the foci is a positive constant. So here, the hyperbola shows us that it's basically these kind of half parabolas, I guess you can say. So this is the shape of the hyperbola, what I am highlighting in yellow. So that is the actual hyperbola. Everything else, or kind of everything that is dashed, just kind of gives you the shape of it. So it tells you where our co-vertex is going to be. It shows you where the transverse axis is going to be. And it also gives us our asymptotes. So just know that we need that box and the x going through it in order to graph the hyperbola. The hyperbola is in yellow, okay? All right. And here, we have two different types of hyperbolas. They're both being centered at 0, okay? So here for the first one, we see that we have x squared over a squared minus y squared over b squared. Versus in the one below, we have y squared over a squared minus x squared over b squared. So here, the difference between the two is that x squared comes first. Sorry about that. So I was saying the difference between the two equations is that the first one, the x squared comes first. Versus in the second equation, the y squared comes first. So that is going to tell you what shape this is going to have. So notice down below, we have our horizontal hyperbola and the vertical hyperbola. So the x squared, the one that comes first, that hyperbola has this shape, where it's along the x-axis. Versus when the y squared comes first, it's along the y-axis. So it kind of has this shape to it, okay? So now we know kind of the shapes of our hyperbolas depending on the formula that we have, okay? And of course, we're going to get into the vertices, the co-vertices, and the foci, and the asymptotes, but I think that's best to kind of dig into once we have an example. So just to make sure that we understand, this one is the x squared over a squared minus y squared over b squared equal to 1. And this one would be the y squared over a squared minus x squared over b squared equal to 1. So let's go ahead and dig in. So for the first example, it says, identify the vertices, co-vertices, and foci of the hyperbola. So you're just like, okay, well, let's start with the vertices. So the vertices are going to be where it hits the axis. So here, our vertices is going to be here and here. So our vertices, that ordered pair is going to be 0, 4, and 0, negative 4. Okay? So that is going to be my vertices. And maybe I'll even put a little V so you know that those are going to be my vertices. Now, the co-vertices are going to be on the opposite axis. So my co-vertices are going to be on the x-axis. So those ordered pair is, let's see, it's a negative 7, 0, and it's also a 7, 0. So that's my co-vertice. Okay, I'm just making sure we get to it. And now, of course, we also have the foci of the parabola. So now for the foci, that's over here. That's going to be our foci. So it's 0 comma square root 65 and 0 comma minus the square root of 65. So we're just getting used to our language here, okay? So we have the vertices, the co-vertices, and the foci. And that's all it wants you to do right now, is just making sure that we understand the visual with our names, okay? So how to label these points. All right, so for the second example here, it tells us to identify the vertices, the foci, and the asymptotes of the hyperbola. So now it's going to be a little bit different, because now we're dealing with the equation instead of a graph. And I do apologize for those 2 lines there. That's just kind of like a typo, so don't worry about those. Those don't mean anything. So we're just we're just worried about the y squared over 49 minus x squared over 32 is equal to 1. So notice how the y squared came first. So since the y squared came first, I at least know that my general shape goes along the y-axis, which is the up and down. So I know I'm going to be looking at that formula when I try to figure out these vertices, foci, and asymptotes of the hyperbola. And if you're like, what is she talking about? I'm talking about this. Since the y squared came first, this is how I'm going to find the certain information that I need. I know that the vertices are going to be here, which is 0 plus or minus a. I know that my co-vertices is going to be here, where I have plus or minus b comma 0. And I also have the foci as 0 comma plus or minus c. And here I have that the foci is going to be c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and write that information down so I have it as a reference. So I went ahead and copied down the formulas for the y squared a squared minus x squared over b squared equal to 1. And so now that I have that general equation, I wrote down the general equation of how to get the vertices, the co-vertices, the foci, and the asymptotes. So now what I can do is I can actually identify my a and my b values since I have that general information. So since I have the y squared that comes first, that tells me that the denominator on the y squared is my a squared. So that looks like my a squared is equal to 49. So if I were to square root both sides, I would get that my a is equal to 7. Likewise, if I have my b squared, which is the denominator of the x squared, that's equal to 32. So if I were to square root both sides, I would get what my b is equal to, which is the square root of 32. Okay, so now I know that my vertices are going to be 0 plus or minus my a value, which is 7. So if I'm doing my co-vertices, that's going to be plus or minus my b value, which is the square root of 32, comma 0. And then the next thing that they want is going to be the foci. So the foci here, I'm going to have to do some math, and that's okay. I'm not afraid of math. I have that c squared is equal to my a squared, which was 49, plus my b squared, which is 32. So I'm going to have to get my calculator. So 49 plus 32 is equal to 81. So that tells me when I square root both sides that my c value is going to equal to 9. So therefore my foci is going to be 0 plus or minus 9. Okay. And now the asymptotes over here, remember my asymptotes is y is equal to plus or minus a over bx. So then y is equal to my a value, which is 7, my b value, which is the square root of 32, and I have my x. Oh, and don't forget the plus or minus. So I'm going to go ahead and just rewrite that because I did forget the plus and minus, and I don't like the way that looked. So plus minus. There we go. So y is equal to plus or minus 7 square root 32x. So that is how I got the vertices, the covertices, the foci, and the asymptotes. Okay, so it all came down to looking at the formulas. So let's go ahead and look at the next example. It says, what is the standard form equation of the hyperbola that has these vertices and this foci? So what helps us is the location of the vertices. Since the vertices has an x value of plus or minus 6 and the y value is 0, that's going to help us to determine what's the general form. So again, I'm going to refer back to this page. This page is really helpful. So let's look at these vertices. So if I'm looking at that vertices, remember we had an x value and the y value was 0. So it's not going to be the y squared first, but it is going to be the one with the x squared first. So this is the formula, or the kind of the graph that I'm going to be looking at. So this is what I'm going to be referencing, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. So I know that my general equation, so I'm going to have that x squared over my a squared minus my y squared over my b squared equal to 1. And now I'm going to write all of my information regarding the vertices and the foci to help myself out. So I wrote down the general terms for the vertices and the foci just from that previous page that I showed you before. So now I can actually plug in my values. So I know that for my vertices, I have plus or minus 6, 0. So that tells me that my a value is going to be a 6. Okay. And I also wrote down my formula for my foci. So here for my foci, I have it as that plus or minus 2 square root 10, 0. Okay. So that foci tells me exactly what my c value is. So that tells me that my c value is 2 square root 10. So let's see, if I were to plug some of these values in, what would I get? So here I am, that c squared. So my c value that I had is 2 square root 10, and I'm going to square it. The a value that I have is 6, and I'm going to square it, plus my b squared. So then here I would have 4 times 10 is equal to 36 plus my b squared. So 40 is equal to 36 plus my b squared. So I'm going to have 40 minus my 36, and I'm going to get 4 is equal to my b squared. So now I have all of my pieces of information. Now I can say that my equation is going to be x squared over my a squared, which is 36, minus my y squared over my b squared, which is 4, all equal to 1. So that is going to be the general equation that I need. Okay, well, I hope that's helpful. Now, for the second part here, we are going to graph the hyperbola. So if we were to graph this hyperbola, the first thing we want to see is what the center is. So for now, my center is going to be 0, 0, okay? The other information that I have is, well, I know that I have y squared comes first. So I know that my general visualization is going to be going along the y-axis. That's going to be up and down. So let's think about this. So my center is going to be at 0, 0. So here is my center. Now, this is what I do to kind of help myself out. So let's look at 64. If I were to square root the 64, that would give me to positive 8. So that means along the y-axis, since I have y, I'm going to go up 8 from the center. Now I'm going to go down 8 from the center. So now I exactly know what my vertices are going to be. My vertices are going to be 8, 0, and negative 8, 0. Okay? So now let's think about the x-axis. So here along the x-axis I have 36. So the square root of 36 is going to be 6. So because I'm doing the x squared, so along the x-axis from the center, I go to the right 6 and I go to the left 6 from that center. So now I know that my co-vertices are going to be 6, 0 and negative 6, 0. And I can tell that I did something wrong because I was rushing. These vertices is not 8, 0 and negative 8, 0. But really, that ordered pair is 0, 8, and 0, negative 8. So just to make sure we know, this is 0, negative 8. And that ordered pair right there is 0, 8. There we go. I just kind of switched my ordered pairs there. So hopefully that makes sense. So now those 4 dots kind of gives me my representation or my outline of the box. And so I know that the edges here that I have, the corners of that box, I know that that asymptote is going to come directly through the opposite ends and through the center. Okay. So those are going to be my asymptotes. Now from here, all I have to do is graph those, the hyperbola. So I'm going to give myself some more room. I'm going to erase some stuff. So since I already know the general outline, I know from the y-axis, it goes out like this. So it cannot go or cross that, those asymptotes. So I've given you the center, the vertices, the co-vertices, and sometimes they want to ask you for the asymptotes. So if they do, you can go ahead and give it to them. So the general equation for the asymptotes is going to be y is equal to plus or minus a over bx. Okay? So here, let's figure out what my a and my b is going to be. So here, my a value is equal to 8. And I have that my b value is equal to 6. So I have that y is equal to plus or minus 8 divided by my 6x. Or better yet, to reduce it, the asymptotes are going to be plus or minus 4 thirds x for your asymptotes. And of course, if they ask for the foci, you can also give me the foci. So the foci, remember, that's going to give me the c squared is equal to my a squared plus my b squared. So my a squared is 64 and my b squared is 36. So 64 plus 36 is equal to 100. So if I were to square root both sides, I get that c is equal to plus or minus 10. So my foci, don't forget that general equation is going to be 0 plus or minus c. So I'm going to have 0 plus or minus 10 for the foci. So the foci, I have 0, positive 10. So that's here. That's my foci. And 0, negative 10. So there is my other foci. Okay? So just so you know, that's 0, 10, and 0, negative 10. Okay. Well, I hope this is making sense, and you have graphed your first hyperbola. Now, let's look into this next one. So here what I have is I have an equation that's not in standard form. What we always want this to be, we always want it to equal 1. We always want our equation to equal 1. So we're going to have to do maybe possibly some completing the square here. So let's see. I have 9x squared minus 4y squared. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 36 to both sides. So now that's going to be equal to a positive 36, since I went ahead and added it. Now, since I want it equal to 1, I'm going to divide everything by 36. And so when I do that, I'm going to get x squared divided by 4 minus y squared divided by 9 equal to 1. Perfect. So now I know that the x squared comes first. So I know that the general outline is going to look like this. And so I can tell you that my a squared is equal to 4. So a is equal to 2. I can also tell you that the b squared is equal to 9. So b is equal to 3. And I can also tell you what my center is going to be. The center is at 0, 0. So my center here is at 0, 0. So if I'm going to go along, I'm going to go along my vertices. So it looks like along the x-axis, I go over 2 and negative 2. And along the y-axis, I go up and down from the center, 3. So that gives me my outline of my box. And I know that the corners are my asymptotes through the center. And since this is going along the x-axis, this is what my shape looks like. Okay. So let's think about this. So I know that I need to talk about my vertices. Remember, that's just plus or minus 2, so negative 2, 0, and 2, 0. My co-vertices, which is my 3, 0, and negative 3. Oops, why do I keep doing that? It's along the y-axis, so it's 0, 3. There we go. And 0, negative 3. Okay. And then, of course, now the last thing is going to be my foci. So the foci, I have the c squared is equal to a squared plus my b squared. So my a squared here is 4, and my b squared is 9. So c squared is equal to 13. So c is equal to plus or minus the square root of 13, since I had squared root both sides. So now I can easily say that my foci, and don't forget that the foci is really just plus or minus c comma 0. So I have the square root of 13, 0, and minus the square root of 13, 0. And if you want that decimal approximation, the square root of 13 That is approximately 3.6. So, if that's so, if I were to draw the foci, remember it's going to be about that 3.6, and that's going to be along the x-axis. So it's a little bit past 3, but not quite 4. So kind of in the middle. And that would give you your foci. Okay. Well, I hope you guys are having fun with these hyperbolas. Let's continue on with the lecture. So now we have hyperbolas not centered at 0, 0. So when it's not centered at 0, 0, we have the minus h and minus k. The h goes along with the x, and the k always goes along with the y. And again, since here the x comes first, then it goes along the x-axis, which looks like this. And here the y came first, so that's going to be going along the y-axis. That's going to be going up and down. Okay. And so here, this one is a hyperbola not centered at 0, where I had the x squared come first. And over here, this is where the y came first. And of course, not centered at 0. Okay, so let's see what they're asking us to do for the first example. So for the first example, it says, what are the vertices, covertices, and asymptotes of the hyperbola? So for this one, it looks like the x squared came first. So just so you know the general equation, we have x minus h squared over your a squared minus your y minus k squared over your b squared is equal to 1. And so your center is always going to be h comma k. So your center for this particular problem, well, since that h value is positive, it's going to be the opposite, so it's going to be negative. And here your y value is going to be positive. So now you have your h and your k. So I have my center. It didn't ask me for my center, but it's always a good habit to write your center. Okay. So now the next thing that we know is underneath the x squared is a squared. So I can say that a squared is equal to 16. So a is equal to plus or minus 4. The square root of 16 is 4. Likewise, the b squared is the denominator of the y. So b squared is equal to 36. So b is equal to plus or minus the square root of 36, which is just 6. So if they're looking for the vertices, if you're looking at that equation, since it's not centered at 0, I have h plus or minus a comma k. So that tells me that my k value is fixed. And this is why I really wanted to identify what my h and my k value here. So really, h value is equal to -2, and k value is equal to a +2. So if I were to plug these in, my h value is -2, and then my a value is going to be 4, and my k value is a +2. So let's think about this. I have -2 plus 4, and I have -2 minus 4. So let's work those out. So I have -2 plus 4, and that's going to give me a +2. And -2 minus 4, that gives me a -6. So that tells me that I have 2, 2, and -6, 2. Okay. All right. So I hope that helps you in figuring out my vertices. So then the next thing I'm going to want to do is my co-vertices. So co-vertices. So for the co-vertices, I have my equation, which is going to be h, and it's going to be comma k plus or minus b. So my h value was fixed at -2, my k value is fixed at +2, and now that b value that I'm plugging in is 6. So I have 2 plus 6, and I have 2 minus 6. So 2 plus 6 gives me 8, and 2 minus 6 gives me a -4. So I have -2, +8, and -2, -4, which are going to be my co-vertices. So I have the vertices, the co-vertices, and the last thing they want is going to be the asymptotes. So, okay, here we go. So we want the asymptotes. So for my asymptotes, that equation is going to be coming from that page. And that is going to be y is equal to plus or minus b over a x minus h plus k. So if I were to plug all of that in, this is how I would get it. Y is equal to plus or minus, so my b value here is 6, and my a value was 4. I have x minus my h value, which is a -2. Plus my k value, which is a +2. So let's just clean this up a little bit. So y is equal to plus or minus 3/2 x plus 2 plus 2. And you could distribute, or you can just leave it alone. I'm okay if you leave that alone for now, okay? All right, so I have found the vertices, co-vertices, and the asymptotes. Okay. So for the next example, it says, what is the standard form equation of the hyperbola that has vertices 0, -2, and 6, -2, and foci -2, -2, and 8, -2? So what I know is that these vertices has a fixed value for that y coordinate. So the only one that has to deal with, or what general formula that is going to be the one that has the x comes first. So that's going to be my x minus h squared over a squared minus the y minus k squared over b squared equal to 1. So this is what I know. So this is just like the one above it. So now I know that I can get my vertices. So I can just copy that down. So I know that my vertices were going to be h plus or minus a, comma, k. So if I have 0, -2, and 6, -2, then without a doubt, I can say that my k value is equal to a -2. And I also have my foci. So if I have my foci, the foci was given to me by a certain equation, and that foci, let me go ahead and grab it. That formula is my h plus or minus c and comma k. So if I have -2, -2, and 8, -2, then it's going to give me some information about my h and my c value. Okay. So to get that h value, what I can do is think about this foci. So this foci, I have h plus c, and I have h minus c. So here is my values, right? So since it's addition, I'm going to go with the number that's bigger. 8 is bigger than -2. So the subtraction, I'm going to say that's the h minus 2. So if I were to go ahead and add these equations together, the c's cancel, and I have 2h is equal to 8 plus -2. So 8 subtract 2 is going to give me 6. Now if I divide by 2 on each side, 6 divided by 2 is 3. So now I have my h value and I have my k value. So h is equal to 3 and k is equal to -2. So then my center would be 3, -2. So that's really helpful. And so now I just need to figure out my a and my b value. Well, I can kind of figure that out using the vertices. So if I use those vertices here, I know that I have h plus a and I have h minus a. So here I have it as a 0 and a 6. So the 6 is bigger, so that's going to be the addition. And the 0 is smaller, so that's going to be my 0. And I already know what h is equal to. I know that h is equal to 3. So this turns into 3 plus a is equal to 6. So 6 minus 3 is equal to 3. So now I have that a is equal to 3. Okay. So far I have a lot of information. The last piece of information that I need, well, let's think about it. I have x minus my h value, which is 3 squared, over a squared. So a squared is 3 times 3, which is 9, minus my y minus my k value. So that's going to be a positive 2 squared over b squared is equal to 1. So this is the last thing that I need. I need to figure out that b squared value. Well, that's going to come from the foci, because the foci, hopefully you remember, that comes from c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared. And so since I have some information, I can tell you how to get my c value. I'm going to re-plug it in. So if I have h plus c is equal to 8, and I have my h value, that was 3. So I can tell you that my c value is going to be 8 minus 3, which is going to give me 5. So 5, or c squared, is equal to 25. So now I have 25 is equal to my a squared, which is 9, plus my b squared. So I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides. So 25 minus 9 gives me a 16. So then if I were to square root both sides, I would get that 4 is equal to my b, or actually b, or, oh, that's what I want actually. Sorry guys. I had 16 is equal to b squared, and that's what I needed. I needed the b squared value. I didn't need to know what b was. If I wanted to, b would just be my plus or minus 4. But what I need is that b squared. So now I can say that that b squared value is 16. So now I have given you the standard form equation of the hyperbola with the given vertices and the given foci. Okay. Now it says to graph this hyperbola. So I have y plus 4 squared over 100 minus x minus 3 squared over 64 is equal to 1. And actually, the second graph is a lot tougher. Not tougher, but it's a bit more work algebraically. So I'd rather deal with that one. So I'm not going to do this problem because it's going to take the whole page to do this. So let's think about that. So what I have is I have this 9x squared. And I'm going to gather all my x's together. So there's an x, and here's an x. So it's a negative 36x. Now I'm going to gather all of my y's together. So I'm going to have a negative 4y squared and a negative 40y. And I have minus 388 is equal to 0. So what I want to do to solve for this, there's a couple of things I need to do. I need to set equal to 1. And the other thing that I need to do is I'm going to use completing the square to get this into the x minus h and the y minus k type value. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 388 to both sides. So I can get my 9x squared minus 36x minus 4y squared minus 40y is equal to my 388. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to factor a GCF, not including the x's. So I'm just going to look at the numbers, because hopefully you remember that whenever you're completing the square, you want the leading coefficient to equal 1. So I need the leading coefficient to equal 1. So I'm going to have an x squared minus 4x minus, and over here, that leading coefficient is a negative 4. So I'm going to have a y squared plus 10y is equal to that 388. So now, hopefully you remember that general formula for the completing the square. Where you have x minus b divided by 2 squared is equal to c plus my b divided by 2 squared. So that means I need to figure out that b value and divide it by 2. So that's going to be here. And then I'm going to square it and times it by 9. So let's think about this. So I'm going to have 9 x minus, and here that b value is 4, so divide that by 2, I would get 2. So because I did that, I grabbed it, I multiplied it, and I got 2. So b value is equal to 4. I divide it by 2 to get 2. And now, remember, don't forget the b divided by 2 squared. But now that extra oomph is that I have to multiply it by the number out in front. So the number out in front is 9. So I need to multiply 9 by my b divided by 2 squared. So b divided by 2 is 2. 2 squared, 2 times 2 is 4. So when I have this equal to 388, I'm going to make sure that I say I add 36 to it. All right. Now I'm going to do something similar for the y's. So I'm going to take that y, so that's equal to 10. So if I divide that by 2, 10 divided by 2 is 5. So I'm going to have a plus 5 in there. So now I'm going to say my b divided by 2 squared. So don't forget I have to multiply by the number out in front. So that would be a 4 that I'm multiplying by. So inside my parentheses, I'm going to have my 5 squared, which is 25 times that 4. And actually, it's not just a 4, but it's a negative 4 that I'm multiplying by. So negative 4 times 25 is a negative 100. So I have to make sure that I add that negative 100 into it. So now I have 9x minus 2 squared minus 4 y plus 5 squared is equal to, and I'm going to add all those numbers together. So I have 388 plus 36 minus 100. And that gives me my total value of 324. And don't forget, I need it to set it equal to 1. So I'm going to divide by 324. Okay. So if I have 9 divided by 324, then I am going to get a 36 in the denominator. And if I have 4 divided by 324, then I get an 81 in the denominator. And it's all equal to 1. So now I know that my center would be 2, negative 5. And so that's going to help me out. So I'm going to have 2, negative 5 as my center. So that's going to be the first dot. I also know that my a squared is equal to 36. So a is equal to 6. So that means along the x-axis, I'm going to go to the right 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I'm going to go to the left 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that means my vertices are going to be 8, negative 5, and negative 4, negative 5. The next thing that I have is my b squared is equal to 81, so my b is equal to 9. So from the center, I'm going to go up 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And from the center, I'm going to go down 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 11, 12, 13, 14. So now I know that my co-vertices are going to be at 2, 4, and at 2, negative 14. So now I kind of have more or less the outline of the asymptotes. And so the corner of those boxes, and you're going to have your asymptotes. And since x came first, this is going to be along the x-axis. And that is how I draw my hyperbola. And the only thing I have left now is the foci. So don't forget that your foci is, and we have that formula somewhere. Where did I have that? Just give me a second. The foci was h plus or minus c, comma, k. So I know that my h value is equal to 2. I know that my k value is equal to a negative 5. And so I just have to plug this in to find my c value. So c squared is equal to a squared plus my b squared. So my a squared was 36, and my b squared value was 81. So if I were to have 36 plus 81, I got 117. So c is equal to plus or minus the square root of 117. So then my foci is going to be h, which is 2, plus or minus the square root of 117, comma, negative 5. So I'm going to go ahead and do this on my calculator. So 2 plus the square root of 117, that will give me about 12.8, comma, negative 5. Let's do the minus. So 2 minus the square root of 117. That gives me about negative 8.8, and I still have that negative 5. So if I were to draw the foci, I have positive 12.8, negative 5. So that's about here. And for the other one, negative 8.8, negative 5, and that's about here. So now I have my foci drawn in as well. And that is the end of section 8.2. So like I said, that problem took up the entire page. Okay? So if you guys have any questions, you guys need any help, please feel free to email me directly. I'm here to help. If not, you can contact the Math Success Center, and of course we also have our embedded tutor. All right. Happy studying.